"We're too busy this year, Grandma. Maybe next Christmas." That was the message I saw in our family group chat, buried under glittering pictures of my grandchildren laughing around their giant decorated tree. I stared at the screen while the hospital monitor behind me beeped in a slow, uncertain rhythm. Snow piled against my window, thick and silent. I'd never felt so cold. My name's Josephine Miller, but everyone in Mapleford calls me Grandma Joe, 79, retired elementary school teacher. Heart problems that the doctors say I shouldn't take lightly. I lived alone in the old family house on Willow Lane, the same one I'd worked 3 jobs to pay off, so my son and grandkids would have something stable when I was gone. I always imagined Christmas would bring us together. That was before they stopped answering my calls. The hospital smelled faintly of disinfectant and weak coffee. A nurse named Linda tucked the blanket around my shoulders. "They visiting later?" she asked softly, like she already knew the answer. I forced a smile. "They're busy," I said. But inside, something cracked. For 40 years, I'd hosted Christmas dinner, roast turkey, pies cooling on the windowsill. My grandchildren chasing each other between the kitchen and the living room while I pretended not to notice the ornaments they broke. Now, not even a card. I kept scrolling through the chat. Photos of my granddaughter posing in a red dress by the fireplace. My grandson showing off the new watch his father bought him. Someone had written "Best Christmas Ever" with little emojis. The silence in my hospital room pressed against my ears until I heard my own pulse echoing like footsteps down a long hallway. How did I become a burden to them so fast? I'd given them everything. Birthdays, college funds, emergency loans. When my daughter-in-law lost her job, I covered their mortgage for 6 months. I never asked for anything back, not even gratitude. Just one seat at the table. The doctor said the heart attack had been moderate. Like pain measured on a scale could explain the feeling of watching your own family erase you. Linda sat with me after her shift, sipping lukewarm cocoa from a paper cup. She didn't talk much, just listened. The kind of listening that doesn't fill silence with fake comfort. I noticed the tired lines on her face, the bruised crescents under her eyes. She told me about working nights to pay her nursing school debts, how she barely made rent on her small apartment across town. I didn't know it then, but that conversation planted a seed. The days passed slowly. Snowstorms hit Mapleford, making the town look like a postcard no one sent me. I watched families wheel patients out of the hospital with balloons, gifts, hugs. My room stayed quiet. Not a single knock. On the 3rd night, I overheard 2 nurses at the station. "Isn't that the old Miller house on Willow Lane?" one asked. "Yeah, big place. Shame she's all alone." Their voices trailed off down the corridor. I clenched my blanket tighter. That house was more than brick and wood. It held my entire life. Every corner had fingerprints of a family that apparently couldn't spare one evening for me. On Christmas Eve, the hospital TV played some cheerful special. A family reunited in the snow, warm hugs, happy tears. I turned it off. Then my phone buzzed, a single message from my grandson. "Hope you're feeling better. Merry Xmas." No call, no visit, not even his name at the end. I stared at that glowing screen until my eyes blurred. My hand trembled as I set the phone down on the tray table. The machine next to me beeped faster, like it was picking up the storm brewing inside. That night, Linda snuck in an extra blanket and a little gingerbread cookie wrapped in tissue. She smiled shyly, like she was afraid I'd scold her for breaking some hospital rule. But I didn't. For the first time that week, someone treated me like a human being, not a forgotten chore, and that's when the thought formed. Quiet at first, like a snowflake landing on my palm. They left me to fade away. But I'm not done yet. A few days later, when my doctor cleared me for discharge, I called my lawyer. My hands shook as I dialed, but my voice was steady. "I need to discuss my will," I said. He was surprised. "Are you sure, Mrs. Miller?" We reviewed everything just last year." "I'm sure," I replied, looking out the hospital window at the frozen world beyond. The nurse who'd tucked me in, the family who'd turned away. My heartbeat matched the ticking of the wall clock. The next morning, I packed my things. The taxi ride home was slow, the roads still icy. I passed the big church downtown, the one where we'd sung carols together years ago. It looked smaller now, or maybe I'd just grown tired. When I opened my front door, the house felt different, colder. The faint scent of pine from the little artificial tree I'd set up alone weeks before still lingered. My cane clicked against the hardwood as I walked to the living room. I stood by the fireplace, staring at the family portraits lined neatly on the mantel. Smiling faces. Christmas mornings. I picked up the photo of us from 10 years ago. Everyone crowded around the table, laughing. My fingers brushed the edge of the frame. Then I set it back down, face down. They thought they could forget me. They thought my heart would give out quietly. They were wrong. I sat down by the fire, pulled out a notepad, and started to write. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a burden. I felt awake. When I came home from the hospital, the house was exactly as I'd left it, quiet, spotless, and painfully empty. I'd always loved the way the morning light spilled through the kitchen window, landing on the checkered tiles like a soft quilt. But that first morning back, it felt harsh, almost judgmental, like the house itself was asking, "Where are they?" I sat at the kitchen table, fingers wrapped around a mug of coffee that had gone cold long before I took the first sip. A thin trail of steam still curled upward from the pot, catching the light. It was the only movement in the room. On the fridge door hung a Christmas card from 3 years ago, one my grandson had made in elementary school. Glittery glue letters spelled out, "Love you, Grandma," in crooked handwriting. I stared at it for a long time, then ripped it down and dropped it into the trash. It wasn't bitterness. It was clarity. A few days later, my son Mark finally called. Not to check on me, of course. He opened with, "Hey, Mom, sorry I missed Christmas. Things were crazy." I said nothing. You know how it is with the kids. Travel, parties, school events. His voice trailed off like even he didn't believe the excuses. Anyway, listen, the house taxes are coming up, right? If you need help managing, I cut him off. I've managed for 40 years without your help. I'll survive. A pause, then a quick laugh, too bright. Of course, just making sure everything's in order. Everything's in order. The way he said it made my skin prickle. After we hung up, I sat in the living room, listening to the old grandfather clock ticking, making sure everything's in order. That wasn't a son's concern. That was someone checking the locks on a safe. Later that week, I received a letter from my bank. Not unusual. I still preferred paper statements, but this one was different. It was a notification. Someone had attempted to access my online banking account from an unknown device. The note was polite, professional, and cold. I read it twice. Then a third time. No one else should have had that password. No one but me. The nurse, Linda, came by that afternoon to drop off a small care package, some soup, bread, and a handwritten card. She wasn't supposed to make home visits, but she said she just wanted to check in. I noticed the way her eyes scanned the house, not with greed, but with quiet curiosity. She'd grown up poor, she told me once. Houses like mine belonged in magazines, not her childhood. Over dinner, she told me about how she was saving up to move her younger sister out of a dangerous neighborhood. She spoke without self-pity, just matter-of-fact determination. I listened, and while she talked, my mind clicked. Slowly, deliberately. That night, I searched through the drawers in my study. Old documents, insurance papers, my original will, dated 7 years ago. Back then, it had seemed logical. The house would go to Mark and then eventually to the grandchildren. But logic didn't account for abandonment. I pressed my hand flat against the desk, feeling the wood grain beneath my palm. Then I pulled the will out of its folder and set it aside. The next day, I made an appointment with my lawyer, Mr. Harris. He'd handled my affairs for decades. Kind man, a little too fond of plaid ties. When I told him I wanted to make changes, his eyebrows rose. "Are you sure, Mrs. Miller? This is a significant shift." "I'm sure." My voice didn't tremble. He hesitated, pen hovering over the papers. "You're aware your family may contest this later?" I met his eyes. "Let them try." Walking out of that office into the frigid Mapleford air felt invigorating. My cane tapped against the icy pavement in sharp rhythm, like a drum beat only I could hear. A few evenings later, something happened that burned the last traces of doubt from me. I had just finished my tea when headlights swept across my living room walls. A car pulled into my driveway. My grandson's silver SUV. For a split second, my heart lifted. Maybe. But when he knocked, his smile was the same charming, careless grin he used when he wanted something. "Grandma, hey, wow, you look great." I let him in. He smelled like expensive cologne and cheap entitlement. "Sorry I didn't make it to the hospital," he started, waving a hand as if brushing away the seriousness. "I had this ski trip planned forever, you know how it is." I nodded slowly. "Skiing." He plopped down on the couch, legs wide, tapping on his phone between sentences. "So listen, Dad said you might need help with online stuff, bills, accounts, whatever. I can set everything up for you, make life easier." There it was. He wasn't here for me. He was here for it. The house, the accounts, the assets he probably thought were already his. I leaned on my cane and watched him scroll. "You think I can't manage my own accounts?" He laughed. "No, Grandma, of course not. I'm not dead yet," I said sharply. His smile faltered for a second. Just a second. But I saw it. The flash of annoyance. The same look his father gave me on the phone. He recovered quickly. Yeah, I know. Just offering." After he left, the house felt colder than before. Not because of the winter outside, but because I'd finally seen the truth laid bare. There was no love in their gestures anymore, only calculation. I walked through the hallway slowly, my hand brushing the wallpaper, as if reacquainting myself with an old ally. This house had protected me for decades. Now I would protect it. I stopped at the mantel again, looking at the upside-down photo frame. Then I turned to the window. Snow was falling again. Quiet, steady, relentless. I whispered to myself, "They're underestimating me." And for the first time in weeks, I smiled. The first real snowstorm of January hit Mapleford hard. Thick white curtains fell for hours, swallowing the streetlights and burying the sidewalks. I stood by my front window in my wool robe, a cup of hot tea warming my hands, and watched the world turn silent. The only sound inside the house was the faint hum of the furnace and the ticking of the kitchen clock. Silence had become my ally. For years, I'd filled this house with noise. Christmas music, chatter, children stomping down the hallway. Now, the stillness made every decision ring louder in my mind. I pulled out my notepad from the drawer where I'd been jotting plans for weeks. At the top, I'd written 3 words in block letters. The first move. Below it, a list. Will revision, completed. Bank access, secured with new credentials. House title, meeting scheduled. Test loyalty. It was the last line that made me pause. Test loyalty. If I confronted them directly, they'd just lie. They always did. Sweet smiles, empty apologies. But if I baited them, I'd see their true faces. I decided to start with Mark, my son. I called him early the next morning. "Mark, I've been thinking," I said in a frail voice I didn't actually feel, "about the house. It's getting hard to maintain. Maybe it's time to make arrangements." He jumped on the line like a fisherman feeling a bite. "Mom, that's a wise decision. I was just telling the kids. Well, anyway, we can help with that. I'll come by this weekend. We'll figure it out together." "Good," I said softly. "I trust you'll handle it properly." The silence on the other end wasn't warm. It was calculating. Saturday arrived with crisp blue skies and snow piled high on the sides of the road. I watched from the window as Mark's SUV pulled into the driveway. He didn't even bother with flowers or, "How are you?" He came in holding a manila folder and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Hey, Mom," he said, shaking the snow off his boots. "I brought some papers to streamline things. Make it all official." Papers. He couldn't wait a week. We sat at the kitchen table just like when he was little, except now he was older, broader, with that faint air of impatience people get when they think they're doing you a favor. He slid the folder toward me. "It's just a basic transfer of ownership. We keep everything in the family. You don't have to worry about upkeep anymore. Property taxes, anything. I'll handle it all." I flipped through the pages slowly. Legal terms, fine print, a couple of lines highlighted. He'd had someone prepare this in advance. "You've been busy," I said. He laughed nervously. "Well, you never know, Mom. It's good to be prepared." I looked up at him. "And if I say no?" He hesitated. "Then nothing changes. But I'd feel better if everything was settled. For your sake. For my sake." "Right." I signed nothing. I told him I'd think about it. And he left with a faint shadow of frustration on his face. But as soon as the door closed, I picked up the phone and called Mr. Harris, my lawyer. "It's time," I told him. "I want the house title revised and transferred to a trust, effective immediately." He hesitated. "Are you sure you don't want to keep it under your name a little longer?" "I'm sure," I said, "but not to my family. We're establishing a trust. Beneficiary will be Linda Dawson." "The nurse?" His voice held surprise, but not judgment. "Yes, she was there when they weren't." The following week, I started making quiet, careful changes. New locks on the doors. Bank accounts moved to a smaller local credit union where I knew everyone by name. Insurance updated. Everything documented. No grand declarations, no angry confrontations. Just paper, ink, and timing. And then came my first strike. It happened almost by accident. Or rather, I let it happen. I invited my granddaughter, Emily, over for tea. She rarely came unless coaxed with promises of heirloom jewelry or stories about the past. She showed up wearing expensive boots and that air of distracted entitlement I'd grown used to. "Grandma, you look so good," she said, kissing the air next to my cheek. I smiled faintly. "Sit, I have something for you." I slid a small antique jewelry box across the table. She gasped. "Is this?" "It was my mother's," I said calmly. "I want you to have it, but before that, I need a little help with my computer. The bank website, you know how confusing it is." Her eyes lit up. "Of course, Grandma. I can help with that." I watched her lean over my laptop, fingers flying confidently. Too confidently. She wasn't just navigating, she was looking. I'd set up a fake secondary account just for this. A decoy with no real funds but plenty of tempting recent transactions. And she took the bait. She opened browser history. She checked saved logins. She thought I wasn't watching. I let her finish, thanked her sweetly, and gave her the jewelry box. Inside was nothing but a folded note that read, "Trust is earned." I'll never forget the flash of confusion on her face as she opened it in her car. She thought she was clever. She didn't know the real inheritance was already moving elsewhere. 2 days later, Mark called again. His voice was tighter this time. "Mom, Emily said you've been changing things. Are you okay?" I'm perfectly fine, I said evenly, just making sure everything's in order. His silence stretched. We're family, he finally said. I looked out at the snow-covered yard, the bare trees scratching at the sky. Yes, I replied. We are. And then I hung up. They thought they were circling a week-old woman. But while they circled, I was building walls they couldn't see. The first strike wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was legal, quiet, and irreversible. And soon they'd realize just how far behind they were. February in Mapleford is always deceptive. The snow begins to melt, puddles collect along the curbs, and the air smells faintly of thawing earth, as if spring is tiptoeing in, but the wind still has teeth. I sat in my sunroom, wrapped in a thick-knit blanket, watching droplets race each other down the window pane. From the outside, it must have looked peaceful. Inside, my thoughts were sharp, deliberate. Every step I'd taken so far had been quiet, calculated. But I knew my family well. They didn't give up when they smelled money. They adapted. And they did. It started with Mark. He began calling more often. Not the perfunctory once-a-month check-ins, but weekly, sometimes twice. "How are you feeling, Mom?" he'd ask, his voice coated in syrup. "I've been thinking about you a lot lately." I'd smile into the phone, playing my role. "That's sweet, Mark. I'm doing all right. Just tired." Then came Emily. She began visiting again. "Just to keep you company," she said. She brought flowers, baked goods, little gifts, but her eyes always flicked toward my desk, the drawers, the laptop. She'd ask innocent questions about whether I'd made any big decisions lately, and my grandson, Jacob, the one who hadn't visited me in over a year, suddenly started dropping by to shovel the driveway. "Don't want you slipping out here, Grandma," he'd say, smiling through chattering teeth. It would have been heartwarming if I didn't know better. They were circling again. This time, softer. I decided to let them. One chilly afternoon, Mark came over with takeout. Chinese, my favorite. He set the bags down on the kitchen table like a dutiful son. "Thought you could use a break from cooking," he said. I played my part. "That's thoughtful of you." We sat and ate together, steam curling up from the containers, filling the kitchen with the scent of soy sauce and ginger. For a moment, if you squinted, it could have looked like a family dinner, but his eyes kept drifting to the hallway that led to my study. "Mom," he said casually between bites of lo mein, "have you had a chance to look over those papers I brought last month?" I sipped my tea slowly. "Oh, those. Not yet." "Not yet?" He tried to keep his tone light, but I caught the tightness underneath. "I've been tired, Mark," I said. "It's a lot to think about, but maybe you're right. Maybe it's time I let someone else handle things." He froze mid-bite, just for a fraction of a second. Then the smile returned, wider this time. "That's great, Mom. I just want to make things easier for you." "Of course you do," I murmured. He didn't catch the edge in my voice. For the next 2 weeks, I leaned into the act. I misplaced my glasses on purpose during one of Emily's visits, fumbling around the living room while she helped me find them. I sighed dramatically about being too old to keep up with all the paperwork. I let Jacob handle some minor repairs around the house, changing light bulbs, fixing a squeaky door hinge, tasks I could have easily arranged myself. They grew bolder, more relaxed, like hunters lowering their guard after believing the prey is cornered, and that's when the false hope crystallized. Mark invited me to a family dinner at his house. "Just us," he said warmly, "like old times." I almost laughed at the irony. The last family gathering I'd been part of was in their group chat, a blurry photo of them laughing around a tree while I lay in a hospital bed. But I said yes. The night of the dinner, I dressed carefully. Soft blue cardigan, my pearl earrings, hair set neatly. I looked exactly like the woman they remembered, gentle, trusting, easily swayed. Their house was warm, filled with the smell of roasted chicken and cinnamon candles. Emily greeted me at the door with exaggerated enthusiasm. Jacob pulled out my chair at the table. Mark poured me a glass of cider like a gracious host. It was a performance. For all of us. Between courses, Mark cleared his throat. "Mom, there's something we'd like to talk about." "Here it comes." Emily leaned forward, hands folded sweetly. "We've been worried about you living alone in that big house," she said. "It's a lot to handle, and, well, we've been thinking—" Jacob chimed in. "Maybe it's time to make things easier for you. We can help take care of the property. Make sure it stays in the family. You don't have to worry anymore." Make sure it stays in the family. I nodded slowly, pretending to be moved. "You kids, you're so thoughtful," I whispered. My hands shook slightly, not from nerves, but because I wanted them to believe it. Mark smiled, relief washing over his face. "We just want what's best for you, Mom." I met his eyes across the table and smiled back, soft, almost grateful. Inside, I was taking mental notes, every word, every promise. A few days after that dinner, Emily brought over a new set of documents. "Just drafts," she said, "no pressure." I tucked them neatly into my desk drawer with a trembling hand, the act perfected now, and told her I'd look at them soon. She left beaming, already texting someone before she reached her car. And for a brief, perfect moment, my family believed they were winning. They believed I was softening, slipping, handing over the keys to the kingdom with a tired smile. But behind the calm facade, I'd been meeting with Mr. Harris weekly, updating, notarizing, securing. Every fake hesitation I gave them was another day they didn't see the trap tightening. The storm wasn't over. It was just quiet before the next snap of cold. That night, alone in my study, I stared at the upside-down photo on the mantel again. The faces in that picture didn't match the people sitting across from me at dinner. Those were strangers now. I traced the edge of the frame with my finger, then flipped the photo back over, just for a second. Their smiling faces stared back at me. "You think I'm old and tired," I whispered to them, "but you have no idea." March came with heavy winds that rattled the old window panes of my house. Mapleford streets were lined with half-melted snowbanks, muddy edges, and the first shy hints of spring crocuses. But inside my home, it felt like the pressure had shifted. My family thought they were closing in. I let them believe it. But belief has a short lifespan when greed grows impatient. It began with another phone call from Mark. His voice was calm at first, almost too calm, the kind that comes right before a sales pitch. "Mom," he started, "I've been talking with a realtor friend. Just exploring options. The market's strong right now. If we list the house soon, you could get top dollar. It would make your life easier." Top dollar. There it was. I stirred my tea slowly, listening to the soft clink of the spoon against the mug. "List the house?" I echoed, like the idea was new to me. "Just to see," he added quickly. "No pressure, but it's good to think ahead, for everyone's sake." For everyone's sake. I told him I'd consider it. He hung up, sounding pleased with himself. But later that afternoon, I found something that stripped away any remaining illusions. I'd gone into my study to grab an envelope only to notice my laptop was slightly out of place. Not by much, just enough that someone who knew their surroundings could tell. My desk chair was angled differently, too. I checked the browser history. There it was. An unfamiliar email login attempt. Someone had tried to reset my password. I didn't need a detective to figure out who. The next evening, Emily dropped by unexpectedly. She carried a plate of brownies and a too-bright smile. "Thought you could use some company, Grandma," she chirped, placing the plate on the counter. I watched her glance toward the study door, subtle, She was getting careless. We made small talk for a while. She asked about my health, my plans for the spring, if I'd decided anything about the house. Every question was wrapped in cotton, but the shape underneath was hard. Then she offered to help me clean out some old boxes in the attic. "It'll be fun, like a treasure hunt," she said. I agreed, but I didn't go up with her right away. I let her climb the creaky stairs alone while I rested my knees downstairs. 10 minutes later, I quietly followed. I found her sitting cross-legged amid old Christmas decorations, leafing through folders she'd clearly brought down from the corner cabinet. Not family photos, not heirlooms, financial records, insurance statements. When she saw me, her face flushed. "Oh, Grandma, I found these and thought—" I held up a hand. "It's all right, Emily." My voice was calm, too calm. She blinked. "It is? Of course. You're just trying to help." I smiled faintly, then turned and walked back down the stairs. She followed moments later, flustered, babbling excuses. I didn't say a word, just served her tea, watched her squirm in the silence, and sent her home with a polite smile. That night, I didn't sleep much. The house creaked as the wind pushed against it, like a ship testing its anchor. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying Emily's guilty face over and over. They were getting desperate, and desperate people make mistakes. A few days later, something did happen, something they didn't expect. Linda, the nurse, came by after her shift, still in her scrubs. She looked worried. "I don't want to overstep," she said carefully, "but a man came to the hospital today asking about you." My stomach tightened. "What kind of man?" "Middle-aged, suit, pushy. Said he was your family representative. Asked if you were mentally stable, if the staff had noticed any confusion." The words hit me like ice water. I didn't need a name. Mark. He was setting the stage. If he couldn't get my signature willingly, he'd try to undermine it. I thanked Linda, but inside, something hard clicked into place. They wanted to play legal games? Fine. I had played teacher for 30 years. I knew how to handle misbehaving children. That weekend, I received an official-looking letter in the mail. It was from a law firm I didn't recognize. Not Mr. Harris's office. The language was carefully vague. Concerns raised about capacity, ensuring protection of family assets, exploring guardianship options. I read it twice. Then again, guardianship. They were trying to take control of my life. I set the letter down on the kitchen table. Sunlight streamed through the window, glinting off the gold rim of my teacup. Outside, children played in the slush, laughing. Inside, I felt a quiet, controlled rage settle in my chest. They thought they could declare me incompetent, move me out, take the house. They'd forgotten something critical. I wasn't alone. Mr. Harris and I had already notarized everything weeks ago. The trust was airtight. And Linda, kind, observant Linda, had witnessed more than they knew. Mark showed up 2 days later, pretending to check in. His eyes swept the kitchen, scanning for signs of frailty. "Mom," he said gently, "some of us are concerned. You've been making big decisions, and we just want to make sure you're okay." I tilted my head. "Are you asking if I've lost my mind?" His smile faltered. "Of course not, but, it's a lot for someone your age." I leaned forward, resting my hands on the table. "Mark, I taught third graders for 30 years. I survived 2 heart attacks. I've managed this house alone for over a decade. Do I sound confused to you?" He blinked. "No, I appreciate your concern," I said, voice cool as winter air. "But I'm not signing anything. Not now. Not ever." He tried to mask the frustration, but it leaked out in his clenched jaw. When he left, I stood by the window and watched his car idle in the driveway for a long time before finally pulling away. The game had changed. The soft manipulation was over. They were moving to open war, and they had no idea that every legal document, every witness, every signature they needed to undo was already out of their reach. Early April arrived with gray skies and stubborn winds that carried the last shreds of winter through Mapleford. The neighborhood lawns were damp and pale, the kind that squish under your boots, but my house stood dry and neat as if it were holding its breath. I spent more and more time in my study, sipping black coffee and going through files, not because I was confused, because I was preparing. Mark's legal maneuver had been bold. Insulting, but bold. He thought he could paint me as fragile and distracted. What he didn't know was that every step he'd taken left a paper trail, and I kept every piece. Mr. Harris and I met twice a week now. He'd grown genuinely fascinated by the unfolding drama. "I have to admit," he said one afternoon, straightening his plaid tie, "you're 3 moves ahead of them." I allowed myself a small smile. I raised them. I know exactly how they think. A few days later, Emily made her move. She showed up unannounced, hair done, blazer sharp, holding a sleek leather folder. "Grandma, can we talk?" she asked sweetly. I invited her in, set out tea and cookies. Old habits. She opened the folder to reveal a stack of papers. "These are just preliminary documents. If you sign here, we can get everything streamlined. You won't have to worry about bills, maintenance, or taxes ever again." She tapped a manicured finger on the signature line, eyes bright. I lifted the top page slowly, as if struggling to focus. "It's hard to read," I said softly. "Why don't you explain it to me?" She launched into a rehearsed pitch. "This way. The house stays in the family. We make sure your assets are protected. No outsiders, no complications." No outsiders. I thought of Linda, who'd stopped by just the night before to bring me homemade soup after a long shift. She had no idea she was already part of a storm much bigger than her. I let Emily finish, nodding here and there like a tired old woman. Then I said, "I'll think about it," folded the papers carefully and set them on the mantel. She left looking victorious. She had no idea she'd just handed me evidence. Meanwhile, Jacob, my grandson, decided to play the helpful handyman again, except this time he didn't come alone. He brought a friend, big guy, silent, carrying a toolbox. "We're gonna help Grandma fix up the place," Jacob announced cheerfully. They walked through my house like inspectors, tapping walls, checking pipes, muttering about potential renovations. I followed them quietly, noting every glance exchanged. In the basement, Jacob whispered to his friend, not realizing the old heating vent carried sound perfectly to where I stood upstairs. "She won't last much longer. Dad says once we have power of attorney, we can do what we want with the place. Split it before summer." I didn't move. I didn't shout. I just memorized every word. That evening, I made a call. Not to Mr. Harris this time, to my old friend Ruth, who volunteered at the local community center. She'd been a notary for 20 years and knew half the town. "Ruth," I said, "I need a favor. Quiet one." 2 days later, Ruth came over. She watched as I signed a few final documents and notarized them in my kitchen while the late afternoon lights slanted across the table. "Are you sure about this, Joe?" she asked. "Absolutely." Then came my trap. I invited the family over for Sunday dinner. It had been years since I'd hosted one, and their reactions were predictable. Mark sounded pleasantly surprised, Emily thrilled, Jacob suspicious but curious. I cooked like I used to. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, pies cooling on the counter. The house smelled like nostalgia. Warm, golden, deceitful nostalgia. They arrived with flowers and fake warmth. I smiled, served food, listened to their chatter. It felt like watching actors read lines from a play I'd already memorized. Halfway through dessert, I sighed heavily, pushing my plate away. "I've been thinking about the house," I said quietly. Silence fell instantly. 3 pairs of eyes locked on me. "I'm tired," I continued. "Maybe you're right. Maybe it's time I made things simpler." Emily was the first to jump in. "Grandma, that's such a good decision. We'll help you every step of the way." Jacob nodded. Mark leaned back, trying to look casual but practically glowing. "I'll bring those papers next week," Emily said eagerly. I smiled softly. "Good. I'll be ready." The following week, they arrived with documents, pens, even a notary Mark had hired. He thought this was it, the moment the old woman handed over the keys. They didn't know Ruth had notarized my set of documents days earlier. They didn't know the trust was already filed and recorded with the county clerk. They didn't know Linda had been listed as a secondary witness to the mental capacity assessment Mr. Harris quietly arranged after Mark's stunt at the hospital. I let them sit at the table, let them line up the papers, let them believe. Then I said, "Before I sign anything, I'd like you to read something first." I handed Mark a copy of the legal notice I'd received about guardianship concerns. His face drained. "I know what you tried," I said calmly. Emily's smile faltered. Jacob froze. "I'm not confused. I'm not weak. And I'm certainly not signing anything you'll bring into my house again." The silence was thick. Mark tried to recover, but his voice cracked. "Mom, it's not—" "Don't." My voice cut through the air like a blade. "You made your choice." They left that night shaken, whispering in the driveway. I watched from the window as their car lights disappeared into the darkness. They thought they'd cornered me. They didn't realize they'd just walked into the first closing door of my trap. By late April, Mapleford's trees had burst into pale green, and the first robins were pecking at the thawed ground. The neighborhood smelled like damp soil and lilacs. People were putting out porch chairs, sweeping winter away. Inside my house, things were quieter, but not calm. Quieter the way the air feels before a storm. After the Sunday dinner showdown, I hadn't heard from Mark or Jacob for over a week. Emily, however, sent me carefully worded texts every couple of days. "Hope you're feeling okay. Thinking about you, Grandma. I'd love to come by and talk whenever you're ready." She didn't mention the documents or the guardianship attempt. She was probing, testing if the door was still cracked open. I didn't answer. Instead, I met with Mr. Harris one last time. In his tidy office with shelves lined in legal volumes and the faint smell of old paper, he slid a final packet across the desk. "It's all filed, county clerk stamped, trust is locked in. Linda Dawson is the sole beneficiary, not contestable." I traced my finger over the embossed seal. "Good." He looked at me curiously. "Do you want them to find out gradually or all at once?" I smiled. "All at once. They've been writing their own play. It's time they see the ending." The following weekend, I received an invitation to a family brunch. Mark was hosting. The message was warm, friendly, overly rehearsed. I knew exactly what it was. Damage control. I accepted. Sunday morning was bright but cold. I wore my best spring coat, pinned on my mother's brooch, and took a cab to Mark's house. As soon as I stepped through the door, I could feel it. The forced cheerfulness, the 2 bright smiles, the smell of cinnamon rolls and desperation. "Mom, you look wonderful," Mark said, giving me a hug that lasted a second too long. Jacob stood behind him, arms crossed, eyes shifting. Emily busied herself arranging plates on the table, avoiding my gaze. We sat down to eat. They talked about trivial things at first. Weather, neighborhood gossip, the local baseball team. It was almost comical. 3 people who had tried to strip me of my autonomy, now pretending everything was normal. Halfway through the meal, Mark cleared his throat. "Mom, about the other night," he began carefully. "We all just got a little, carried away. There's been misunderstandings." Misunderstandings. Emily jumped in quickly. "We love you, Grandma. We just want what's best for you. Maybe we went about it the wrong way, but our intentions were perfectly clear," I interrupted softly. The table went silent. I set my teacup down deliberately, letting the sound punctuate the room. "You tried to declare me incapable. You entered my house without permission. You tampered with my computer. You went through my personal papers. I know every single thing you've done." Mark's jaw tightened. "You're exaggerating." "No," I said. "I've been watching." I reached into my bag and pulled out a neatly organized folder. Inside, copies of the guardianship letter, screenshots of the password reset attempts, photos of Emily in the attic, a written notarized statement from Ruth, and a signed witness statement from Linda, dated the night she told me about Mark's hospital visit. I laid the folder on the table. Slowly. Jacob leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "What is this?" "Evidence," I said calmly. "Every step you took to undermine me is documented. Every conversation, every legal maneuver. You thought I was confused. I was documenting." Emily's face paled. Mark reached for the folder, but I placed my hand on it. "Not yours." The silence stretched so long I could hear the refrigerator humming in the background. Then Mark snapped. "Mom, why are you doing this? We're family." I met his eyes steadily. "You remembered that word awfully late." He pushed his chair back, anger rising. "You can't just give everything away to some stranger nurse. This is our family legacy." "Legacy," I repeated quietly. "When I lay in that hospital bed last Christmas, your legacy didn't visit. It sent one text message." Jacob stood now too, fists clenched. "You're going to regret this," he muttered. I smiled faintly. "No, I don't think I will." I opened the folder just enough for them to glimpse the notarized trust documents. "It's done. Irrevocable. You're not inheriting the house. Linda is." The shock hit like a gust of cold air. Emily gasped. Mark went pale. Jacob swore under his breath. "You're lying," Mark said finally, voice shaking. "Ask the county clerk," I replied, "or Mr. Harris, or Ruth. It won't change the answer." They scrambled after that brunch. I saw it in the sudden burst of activity. Jacob driving by the house late at night, parking across the street like I wouldn't notice. Emily sending tearful messages about not meaning to hurt me. Mark calling repeatedly, switching between charm and threats like a man who'd lost his footing. I didn't block them. I didn't fight. I just waited, because I knew what was coming. When people are exposed, truly exposed, they either retreat or lash out, and my family wasn't the retreating kind. 1 week later, it happened. A letter arrived from a different law firm, a formal notice of intent to contest the trust on grounds of undue influence. They were accusing Linda, the nurse who sat beside my bed when no one else did, of manipulating me. I read the letter slowly, a smile forming, because this, too, I had planned for. Linda wasn't just a witness. She'd undergone a background check months earlier at my request through Mr. Harris's firm. No debts, no criminal history, clean record. Every meeting with her had been documented. There wasn't a single thread they could pull that wouldn't snap back in their faces. I folded the letter neatly and set it beside my cup of tea. Outside, the robins hopped along the fence, unaware of the quiet war unfolding. They thought this was their counterattack. They didn't realize they'd just stepped onto the final trap. May arrived in Mapleford with warm breezes and blooming dogwoods. The air smelled like wet earth and cut grass. Neighbors were mowing lawns, hanging flags, setting out patio furniture. Everything felt fresh, alive. except inside my family's little storm. They'd filed their legal challenge officially. Undue influence. They claimed Linda had pressured me, that I was mentally compromised, that the trust was suspiciously altered. Their lawyer must have thought they'd found a clever angle. They didn't know I'd been building a fortress for months. Mr. Harris called me the day the filing came in. "They're playing hardball," he said. "I expected nothing less," I replied. The court hearing was set for mid-May. It wasn't a dramatic televised spectacle like in movies, just a modest county courtroom with beige walls, squeaky benches, and the faint smell of floor polish. Linda sat beside me nervously, dressed neatly in a light gray blouse. She wasn't used to courts. She whispered, "I feel like I shouldn't be here." I placed my hand over hers. "You're here because you were there," I said, "when it mattered." Mark arrived in a tailored suit that didn't hide the dark circles under his eyes. Emily was pale, mascara perfectly applied, clutching a tissue she didn't use. Jacob slouched at the end of the row like a teenager forced to attend a lecture. When the judge entered, the room fell quiet. Their lawyer started first, painting a picture of a kind but confused elderly woman who had fallen under the sway of a younger caregiver. His words were soft, persuasive, rehearsed. Emily even sniffled at the right moments. Then it was Mr. Harris's turn. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He presented the notarized documents, the timeline of legal meetings before Linda ever entered the picture, statements from Ruth, hospital staff testimony, browser logs, bank alerts, a sworn affidavit from my cardiologist confirming I was mentally sound, independent, and perfectly capable of making legal decisions. And then came the kicker. Linda stood up, timidly at first, and told the court how she'd met me, how she'd brought soup, how I'd been the one who suggested changing my will, not her, how she'd even refused at first, saying it wasn't her place. The courtroom was silent when she finished. The judge leaned forward. "Do you have any evidence," he asked Mark's lawyer, "to support the claim of undue influence?" The lawyer stammered. "Well, Your Honor, it's circumstantial." "Not good enough," the judge cut in. Bang of the gavel. Petition denied. Case dismissed. Just like that. Outside the courthouse, the sun was high and hot. Linda was in tears, not because she'd won anything, but because the weight she'd been carrying finally lifted. "I didn't do anything wrong," she whispered. "I know," I said, "and now they do too." Mark stormed past us, jaw clenched, not saying a word. Emily followed, her carefully curated sympathy wiped clean. Jacob kicked at the curb as he passed. For the first time in months, I didn't follow their retreat with fear. I watched with the cold stillness of someone who just closed a door that would never reopen. The news spread through Mapleford faster than I expected. Small towns have quick tongues. By the end of the week, people were whispering in the bakery, at the church, in the library. "Did you hear what happened with the Millers?" "She left the house to the nurse. They tried to declare her unfit." Can you imagine? It wasn't part of my plan, but I didn't stop it either. Reputation had always mattered to Mark. He thrived on respect, image, the illusion of being the responsible son. That illusion was cracked now, and the cracks were public. Jacob lost the handyman job he'd been counting on for summer. Emily's friends quietly stopped inviting her to their little social events. And Mark? He withdrew. People stopped trusting him. Business partners grew cold. You can't play the good son card when the whole town knows you tried to seize your mother's house. A month after the case closed, I hosted a small gathering at my home. Not family, neighbors, friends, a few people from church. Linda came too, shyly at first, unsure if she belonged. I made sure she sat at the head of the table with me. When people asked about the trust, I didn't brag. I just said, I gave it to the person who showed up. And that was enough. The twist, though, came quietly. 2 weeks later, Mr. Harris called. I finalized the second document, he said. Second document? Linda asked, sitting beside me as I put him on speakerphone. Yes, I said. The one I didn't tell anyone about. Because months earlier, while setting up the trust, I'd created a separate community endowment in my name. After Linda's passing, the property would transfer to the town to fund scholarships for nursing students, not to any future heirs of hers, not back to my family, not to anyone. Linda stared at me in disbelief. Why didn't you tell me? Because it wasn't about you owing me anything, I said. It was about making sure they never get it. She covered her mouth, tears welling. You're something else. I leaned back in my chair. They wanted a legacy. Now they'll get one. Just not the kind they imagined. I never spoke to Mark or the grandchildren again. They sent a few letters over the years. Half-hearted apologies, awkward attempts to talk things through. I burned them in the fireplace. Every spring I sit on my porch and watch the dogwoods bloom. Linda visits sometimes after her shifts. She brings her sister. They help me with groceries, sit and drink iced tea with me as the sun goes down. The house is quieter now, not empty, just honest. And sometimes, when the wind rustles through the trees at night, I think about that Christmas, the cold hospital room, the silence, the group chat message. They thought I'd fade away quietly. Instead, I rewrote the ending.